Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Christoph Loch. I'm the director of the Cambridge Judge Business School. Thank you for coming to the speech by Professor Hans-Werner Sinn on the meaning of Brexit for the UK and Europe. It's my great pleasure to host you today. And we are looking forward to your thoughts. As I'm sure you all know, the timetable is ticking, and the UK is only 25 days away from leaving the European Union. Since the country first voted to leave in June 2016, it's been a very turbulent time with muddled goals and internal strife. And we are still in the midst of uncertainty that's put businesses off and actually is now putting foreign students off. And I hope Professor Sinn's views might help us to make some sense of it all. Professor Sinn is one of Europe's most influential economists, former president of the IFO Institute in Germany that advised the German government on economic policy. His books include The Green Paradox, Casino Capitalism, and The Euro Trap, all of which were bestsellers in Germany and abroad. And his clear-sighted view on the 2008 global financial crisis earned him a space on the top 10 people who changed the world list, published by The Independent in 2011. And Professor Sinn has many more merits which we don't have time to mention now because we want to use the time that we have. Unsurprisingly, he has now turned his attention to Brexit, and he has given some influential speeches on Brexit, and I'm delighted that he's joined us today to share his thoughts of what could happen next. We are also very happy to welcome his wife, Gerlinde Sinn, herself an economist and co-author of the Sinn acclaimed book Jumpstart on the unification of Germany. A very, very warm welcome to both of you. Professor Sinn's lecture will last about 50 minutes. That will give us a time for a couple of questions before we will then close at 5 o'clock. So now, without any further ado, I hand over to you, Professor Sinn. We are very much looking forward to your remarks. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Professor Loch, for the invitation, ladies and gentlemen. I have changed the title a little bit, what Brexit means for Europe, because I don't give up the hope that Britain is part of it. So, of course, I will also speak about what it means for your country. And I admit it is not a completely neutral assessment. It's a biased German perspective. But given that you always talk to one another, it might be useful to hear what we in Germany think about this issue and what a learned view could be. There are different views, of course. This is how you seem to see or many in your country seem to see the EU. The ship is close to move over the waterfall, and Britain is abandoning the ship. And there are the Italians who are thinking about the same thing. There are Nordics who are kept in the boat, and here is Mrs. Merkel who tells Europe the direction to go. But there is an alternative view, and this I don't have to explain very much. That's how we in Europe, so to say, see your decision-making process. I wrote a book about it. I was so upset in June 2016 about this decision that I changed my plans over the summer. I had planned to write another book, and I wrote this book in German, Der Schwarze Juni, and it came out already in that same year, basically about Brexit. It's not available in English, but still the content is similar. Some people say Britain is a complicated country, or the UK is complicated, and you know, if they want to go, let them go. Don't stop those who want to leave. Travelers should be able to pass away to other places. I find this not convincing, given the size of the UK. You see here the German contribution to the European EU GDP and the British one. And if I say British, I often mean United Kingdom. I come to, of course, the difference. It's the second biggest economy. It's the second biggest economy in Europe, and one should be nervous about seeing this leaving. Then comes France, then come the others. And, you know, here is a group of countries which are still missing of the EU. These are the 19 smallest countries, and their contribution to the European GDP is the same as the British, the UK contribution. If you see it from that perspective, it is clear that this is like an explosion of an atom bomb for the post-war order in Europe. It is as if 19 out of 28 EU countries leave simultaneously. And given the sheer size of your country, I think we have to think twice about what we are doing. This is my topics. Why Germany wanted Britain in, the results of the referendum, the exit agreement, cherry picking, reasons for the Brexit, what Brexit means for the UK, what it means for Germany, where the Brits are right, and my policy recommendations. So let me begin with a continental German view of why Britain is useful in the EU. This conference is the Élysée Conference, the treaty signed in 1963, the German-French Friendship Treaty, which was recently renewed, by the way. And it happened that the German Bundestag, the parliament, put a preamble to this treaty saying that yes, we like the French, but we like the Brits too, and we would like to join them the European common market. It was these two politicians who convinced the Bundestag at the time. Charles de Gaulle was upset when he heard about it, that there was this preamble. Les politiciens allemands ont peur de ne pas ramper assez profondément devant les anglo-saxons. Ils se comportent comme des cochons. They behave like pigs, these German politicians, and they can't bow sufficiently deeply in front of the Anglo-Saxons. And he wanted to withdraw the Friendship Treaty when he heard about this preamble, but he in the end didn't, but he blocked the British entry twice, in 63 and in 67. And only when he was dead in 73 was it possible for Britain to join the common market, or which later was the EU. It was a success also of German politics, because Germany wanted Britain in to equilibrate Europe. Under the umbrella of Britain, German industry prospered. because Britain brought in its liberal attitude towards the world with its Commonwealth. So the British influence always ensured that there would be free trade in goods with the rest of the world. And I beg, without the British influence, it would not have been possible for the German export industry to prosper, because then otherwise we might have become a fortress with customs duties and so on. You know, I gave this lecture in German at Christmas time to a German audience, trying to convince them that it is not a negligible event and that they should do everything they can to keep the Brits in. And I don't use another language here in front of you, so you get a feeling of how in Germany one might see these things. And of course, from a German perspective, it was very useful to have a nuclear power, a second nuclear power in the EU, because politically this would make the protection cheaper. If you have two powers on whom you can rely, it's better than having only one. Of course, we have the NATO, but you know what Trump is doing to the NATO. It's not so clear what the stability of NATO in the future will be. My next point, the referendum. You probably have seen that. I carry coal to Newcastle here, I think. But this is the regional distribution of the votes. Green is Remainers, and red is the Brexiteers. And of course, you see a little green spot, which is Cambridge here also. It's a non-United Kingdom. It's a very sharp division between the regions here in the United Kingdom. Okay, there was this decision. Exit according to Article 50 of the EU Treaty is possible. The formal declaration was made in March 2017, and if nothing other happens, by the 29th of March, in a few days, Britain will be out. The decisive vote, I hope it's still this day, will be on 12th of March, next week, Tuesday, when Theresa May brings her renewed version of the exit treaty to the Parliament. I don't know what the odds are, but you have a better feeling what will be the result of it. Fortunately, we have a sentence of the European Court of Justice of the 10th of December. It said that if the UK wants, it can withdraw, revoke the decision to exit, which wasn't clear before. And even if this deadline is postponed to the future, as Theresa May said she would and suggest in case she failed with her attempt to bring this to a decision on the 12th of March. Even in that case, Britain could later revoke. So the revoking period would, with some probability, be extended beyond the 29th of March. Now, the exit agreement. It's very complicated to describe in a few words this agreement of hundreds of pages. It's not easy to understand what is going on here. But basically, I interpret it as saying the following. Of course, this is clear. In case this agreement will be accepted on the 12th of March, then nothing changes basically until 2020. And the UK unilaterally has the right to postpone this deadline 2020 until 2022, if it wishes, until July 2020. So in practical life, this means everything stays as it was, if it is not this hard Brexit. But thereafter comes the backstop if no further agreement is found. So the exit agreement is not an agreement about the future, really. It is just an agreement about something which would happen in case no agreement is found on the future. And there is a period until 2022 during which this ultimate agreement could possibly be negotiated. And what does it say? I don't want to go through the history of arguments used by Barnier and May and so on. It went to and fro, and the Chequers proposal was rejected by the EU and so on. But the ultimate agreement was that Northern Ireland basically remains in the common market in the sense that the 4 liberties are preserved, namely the free mobility of labor, free exchange of goods, of services, and of capital. So the 4 fundamental liberties which define the European common market would apply, with little exceptions, to Northern Ireland. But Great Britain remains in the customs union only, because this would just be goods, merchandise, for which there would be free trade with the EU. The whole rest not. No free capital movement, no free migration, and no free exchange of services. And that, of course, is problematic as it is splitting the UK. When I heard that, I couldn't believe it, because I thought there's no chance whatsoever that the Brits will ever accept such an agreement. Germany would never accept an agreement which puts a border between some of its states. Well, there are 15 states. Impossible. How can this be negotiated? I thought, complete nonsense. And I was betting that it would not find a majority. Maybe with the new arrangements he is negotiating now, it is possible. But if I were a Brit, I would never accept it. Never. And then there's this additional clause that an exit from the backstop, once it is signed, is only possible with mutual consensus. So while Article 50 allows Britain to unilaterally declare exit, once this agreement is signed, no possibility any longer. So that's another reason why I think that it would be a miracle if she found a majority for this agreement. Basically, the problem in a nutshell is this. The current agreement, or if you want to leave, let's say it this way, if you have to put the border somewhere. And one possibility is you put it between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. But the first customs officer put there, by whom, doesn't matter, UK or EU, will with some probability be shot by the IRA. So the conditions which we have seen some decades ago will reappear. If you don't want that, you can put it here, into the Irish Sea. But that's more or less what we have now in the backstop agreement, and it means that there would be a borderline within this state United Kingdom, which undermines the integrity of the state. If Britain does this, my bet is that Northern Ireland will prosper because it's closely linked to the EU and has free trade. And the Scots will think what they should be doing when they see that. And at some stage, there will be a further referendum. And there is a risk that the borderline will be here. And then we don't have the UK, we don't have Great Britain, we just have the old Britain. This is a sequence of events which I do not find unlikely. So once you think about it, about this difficulty, and you can think as long as you wish. You come to the conclusion, in my opinion, that there is no possibility to both preserve the political integrity of the United Kingdom and prevent the IRA from appearing again on the scene and risking a civil war. The only possibility for solving the two difficulties is remaining in the EU. And the rest is wishful thinking. Now, during the negotiations, Theresa May argued, well, we need the possibility to have free trade with the rest of the world. And we also want to have free trade with you, Europeans. But we do not want to have free migration. That was basically the Chequers proposal she made. And the EU rejected that on the grounds that this would be cherry picking, and cherry picking cannot be allowed. The EU said, either you accept all 4 liberties or none. You cannot just pick out those which you prefer. This is an argument used. Is it a valid argument? I think it is entirely false from an economic perspective. I'm an economist. Why? Because migration and trade are substitutes from an economic perspective. Trade makes equal goods price ratios directly and indirectly through factor price equalization mechanisms, the same relative factor prices, namely wages, across the regions. And if you have free migration while you have no trade, you have automatically the same factor prices, and that indirectly, through the mechanisms of trade, makes the same goods price ratios. That's what the pure theory of economic trade tells us. So in a sense, these two things are substitutes, and because they are substitutes, it certainly does not follow that if you limit one freedom, that you should also limit the other. To the contrary, if you limit one, the other is even more important for mutual benefits of the trading economies. It is as if you consider my left hand and my right hand. Suppose my left hand is broken. Those who say that you can't have cherry picking implicitly say that the right hand should be bound to my body, for symmetry reasons. Obviously, this is nonsense. I need my right hand to take over some of the functions of my left hand if the left hand is broken. From an economic perspective, of course, it is good that we have both liberties, but given that, unfortunately, one is not available, you should at least have the other one to minimize the damage. So the dogma of the invisible liberties is politically perhaps founded, I understand that, but from an economic perspective, I think it's not true. There could be one rationale for it, namely to punish the Brexiteers, those who want to exit. The EU has used the argument saying that, you know, if we let the Brits just do the cherry picking, then others come and want to do the same thing, and then they would, the whole thing would dissolve. But what a kind of view is this of the EU? For me, an institution which needs to punish those who want to exit is a prison. But that's an analogy which we certainly do not want to use for the EU. So I dislike this argument entirely, and I reject it as depicting a view of the EU which I certainly do not endorse. For me, the EU is an institution to which you should in which you should like to participate, And because you have benefits, and everyone has benefits, and so you don't need to punish anyone who leaves. Okay, I do see there is a reason for punishing those who want to exit. If you want to have a redistributive union, that is taking resources away from one group of countries and giving it to another group, then of course you have losers. And the losers would like to exit, and in order to prevent them from exiting, you have to punish them. That could be a rationale. The deeper reason could be a mutual insurance, because insurance and redistribution is very similar. From an ex-ante point of view, redistribution can be seen as insurance and vice versa. But we are not yet in the state where we can have an insurance union in Europe before we found the United States of Europe as a common state with a power center. We are far away from that. And if we cannot sign the insurance contract in that sense by creating a common state, we can't have redistribution like insurance, risk sharing and all that nonsense which is being discussed. I find this not yet appropriate at this stage of the European development. I rather prefer for the moment an institution which follows the Pareto principle, making decisions where no one has a disadvantage. It's like trade. Everyone has a little advantage, at least no disadvantage. You voluntarily participate, and therefore the cake becomes bigger, undoubtedly bigger. And the extra activities, like insurance, require this insurance contract, which we cannot sign for the time being. So I'm against punishment. As far as I understand, there were a couple of reasons for the Brexit. Brits were not content with the European Court of Justice. All countries have one Supreme Court judge. Be it Malta, be it Britain, is nothing to be said against the legal tradition of Malta, but you cannot easily compare it with Britain. There's something wrong in terms of giving every country the same weight here in the judicial decision-making process in Europe. Then there was a concern about the net payment to the EU budget. 6.3 billion euros in 2016 were paid. But come on, this is really peanuts. This is 2.5 per mil of the British GDP. Forget it. Germany pays twice of it, but it's not. That cannot really be an issue. But it was an issue, of course. The argument was made. Then it was argued too many majority decisions were made, and Britain was unable to organize a blocking minority in the Minister Council. This I understand. We should not have majority decisions because they allow for redistributive actions in the EU. If we want to stick to the Pareto principle, we need decisions which more or less are endorsed by nearly everyone. Not fully, you should not have a blocking minority to a single country, but you should not go for majority voting. And then there was the argument that the EU violated the subsidiarity principle, Article 5 of the Treaty for the European Union, according to which decisions can only be taken in Brussels if there are cross-border externalities. And if they are not, they should be taken at a lower level of the political hierarchy. And the violations are multifold. Look at merchandise. There's a minimum wage and color of apples, a dense net of definitions for vegetables in the EU in order to fence off foreign products. This is a non-tariff trade barrier, which the EU imposes by defining the product qualities. Other reasons I cannot really say. consumers see the apple, they can taste it, they can decide themselves. Why does the EU have to define that? Bananas, the same thing. Light bulbs, traditional light bulbs are forbidden now. And this is ridiculous because we have already the emissions trading system, which takes care of the ecological externalities to a full and efficient extent. A further step going into a prohibition of light bulbs is something which I would call an ideological paternalism. And the famous curvature of cucumber to fence off third country imports is, of course, so ridiculous that the EU in the meantime has understood it, and they banned this specification. Or power limitations for dishwashers and vacuum cleaners. If you have an old vacuum cleaner in Europe, keep it, because the new ones don't function anymore. They are limited. There's a much longer list I could make. Obviously, there's something wrong with Brussels in terms of violating the subsidiarity principle permanently, taking over functions which are not actually functions of the EU, transcending, going beyond the borders of the mandate. And Germany is now having this NOx problem. We have emission standards, emission standards for nitrous oxides coming out of diesel cars, which implies that some German cities have now to ban the cities for diesel cars, older diesel cars. You can say, well, fine, that is useful, but let the city decide itself. Why is this a Brussels affair? Obviously, there are no externalities whatsoever. It's not CO2 which has externalities. It's a local emission, which even the Federal Republic of Germany should not be concerned with, let alone Brussels. And then agricultural prices. Patrick Minford has made the argument that the EU prices are 20% above the world market level. And if we exit, he said, then we can cheaply buy our lamb meat from New Zealand as we used to do before for Christmas and so on. Yeah, there is a point, of course. And the main thing, though, was migration. The exit poll, which was done by YouGov on the day of the referendum, showed that most people, of course, who voted for Brexit wanted independence, trivially. But that's meaningless. The first real issue that was mentioned was migration. So that was in the heads of people, and other issues, jobs, investment, family, and so on, came later. Obviously, this was the strongest motive among the Brexiteers. And pictures like these, this is the autumn 2015, where refugees from Syria were channeled through Slovenia, coming to Germany, or these here with Mrs. Merkel were used at the time to make the argument against Brexit. There were camps in front of Calais, and TV was full of that. Whether rightly or wrong, right or wrong, this obviously affected the public debate. It was not the refugees only from non-EU countries. It was also originally the migration from EU countries, which Britain had, in a sense, decided itself because they did not make use of this period, of this waiting period, for allowing workforce from other Eastern EU countries to enter Western economies. So what does the Brexit mean for the UK? The immediate risks are these, of course. There is a view that there would be such a queue in front of Calais, but I don't think this is an issue. This will be temporary and will be resolved. More serious is the question, will the EU impose customs duties? Okay, according to the GATT rules, it would be allowed to have on average 2.8% customs duties, and reversely the Brits 3.6%, but it's on every transaction. A good often in the course of its production process crosses the canal various times, often. The intermediate stages of production mean that value added is shifted across the border a couple of times until the final product is made, and then there is a cascade effect. It's not just these low customs duties values, they accumulate when you divide the overall sum of customs by the ultimate value of the final product. And so that could be substantial, a substantial burden on EU-UK trade. There would be a revenue, of course, by Britain, and a revenue by the British customs offices, and by the EU, which by law is entitled to collect this revenue. And the estimate is it would be 5.1 billion euros. By chance, it's a similar number as the British contribution to the EU budget. Think of what kind of influence this has on the incentive structure. If Britain exits, the EU will certainly like to use this source of funds because they live on that. All the officers in the employees in Brussels, they live on customs duties. Of course, they also get direct contributions from the countries, and there is a joint calculation, but you know, this is a safe income which you have in any case. And this will affect their decision-making process. The UK is no longer a country which primarily delivers its goods to the rest of the world, the old Commonwealth and so on. No, 50% of the exports of the UK go to continental Europe, to the old EU, the continental part of the EU. So risking the imposition of substantial customs duties on these exports will be potentially harmful for the British industry. What will it do to the current account? In the short term, it might deteriorate it. Here you see the current account deficit. So it's basically exports minus imports minus interest payments net terms to the rest of the world. And it's negative, as you see here. This is 2004, when the first wave of Eastern enlargement came, when Poland, the Czech Republic, and so on, these Eastern European countries joined. And this is the time of the referendum. You see that the current account had deteriorated substantially, and one wonders whether this difficult trade situation of Britain had some influence on the decision. It is possible to argue that Britain, in a sense, was a victim of the EU's Eastern enlargement. Not only through migration, here one can have very different views. I don't think they could claim to be a victim at all, but in terms of competitiveness, possibly. Southern Europe definitely was the victim of Eastern enlargement, because all of a sudden low-wage earners joined in millions the EU and made it difficult for them to survive in international competition. And Britain might have been in a somewhat similar situation. You know, just to give you an example, the Polish wages are 8 euros, and the Greek wages are 15 euros. You just have to compare these numbers to understand the problems of Greece and the same problems in other southern European countries. And I think there's a similar aspect with Britain, which one might need to discuss. Will there be capital flight? Yes, of course, there is already capital flight. By definition, a current account is a capital export. But with capital flight, we don't mean a current account. By definition, it is the actual movement. We rather mean the intention to leave the country. If there is an intention to leave the country for capital, then it has an effect on the exchange rate. And the exchange rate movement tells us whether there is such an intention, whether the actual current account reacts quickly or not. J-curve effect and so on is a completely different issue. And here you see, of course, the pound has declined over the last few years, and in particular since the referendum. This is already the sign of a sort of capital flight. What will Brexit mean for the business structure? We have to distinguish between the short run and the long run. In the short run, I think it will harm British industry for the reasons I explained. In the long run, I'm not sure. Here I compare 3 countries, the UK, France, and Germany, and look at 3 different sectors. Blue is the manufacturing sector, its contribution to GDP. Yellow is the financial services and insurance sector. And green is the public sector, including defense and social insurance. And if you compare these 3 countries, you find that each country has a particular specialization. The Brits obviously have a relatively large yellow triangle in comparison to the others. That's the financial industry. So it's a speciality of Britain to focus on financial services and export financial services to the world. France has a specialization niche in the public sector. It's not so clear what they can do with it because over the decades, actually, the French industry went down and they replaced the jobs that were lost in manufacturing with government jobs. So the children of the former manufacturing workers became government employees, and they earn a wage which is financed with taxes taken away from someone else. And these wages are called GDP, you know, a contribution to GDP. It makes good statistics, but you cannot really that easily eat what the government employees produce. And this is Germany, which has a speciality in terms of the manufacturing sector. So these 3 countries have their idiosyncratic specializations. And what will now happen to Britain? Britain's manufacturing sector. Okay, I repeat, in the short term there will be difficulties. In the longer term, I'm not so clear. One thing seems clear: the city will be losing. That's why they didn't want the Brexit. But you know, this is not only a disadvantage for everyone. It's a disadvantage for the city. We see already here, I think, declining real estate prices in London. But it might have its advantage for other sectors of the economy. Look again at this map here. You see the regions where the Brexiteer majority was strong. These are the old industrial regions of Britain. And I think they suffered from the city in the sense that the city's success brought them a Dutch disease. What is the Dutch disease? When the Netherlands found gas, sold the gas to the world, they were able to increase their wages and the exchange rate was going up, the living standard was increased, and the result was problems for the manufacturing sector. Another word for the Dutch disease is resource curse. So if you look at countries in the world which are strong in selling natural resources, they have so high wages resulting from that the manufacturing sector has difficulty surviving with these high wages. And what the resource sales of Venezuela, of Norway, would be for the rest of the economy were the sales of financial services of the city to the Brits. It led to a high value of the pound, and that high value of the pound made life for British manufacturing sectors very difficult. And this obviously was the Dutch disease, and a Brexit would help Britain to recover from the Dutch disease, because the pound would devalue, not only by capital flight, but structurally, because one important export sector would be in difficulties. But this recovery will, of course, hurt others, for example, Germany. The UK was Germany's third biggest export market, is now the fourth biggest export market after China took over the third place. And if the British industry comes up, German industry will have more difficulties competing. So lower value of the pound will, of course, be a problem for Germany. But there's another disadvantage for Germany. It's a political disadvantage. Insofar as the Brits, which with their free trade organization, are no longer in, which I mentioned initially. And I think this is much more important than anything else. In the Lisbon Treaty of the EU, it was agreed that for decisions of the Minister Council, there can be a blocking minority if a group of countries which comprise at least 35% of the joint population are against a decision. So the blocking minority is 35% of the EU population. And if Britain leaves, it's no longer clear that that group of countries, to which my country often belongs, will have this blocking minority. I give you here the population shares in the EU. Suppose we look at the so-called, at a group of countries which I might call Nordic countries. That's the UK, Germany, Austria, plus the Hanseatic League, the new Hanseatic League, you know, the northern countries. They together have 39% of the EU population. And if you then look at the Mediterranean countries, those which have a coast really at the Mediterranean Sea, they have 38% of the EU population, and then come the others. Okay, both these groups, the Nordic countries and the Mediterranean countries, have more than 35% of the population, and therefore both have the blocking minority in the Minister Council, meaning that EU decisions need to equilibrate these two forces. If Britain no longer is in the Nordic group, this whole equilibrium will disappear. If we take UK out, then the Nordic bloc shrinks from 39 to 30%, and the Mediterranean bloc increases from 38 to 43%. It's a new balance of power in the future, and this is such an important disadvantage that I personally think Germany should, in case Britain exits, ask for a renegotiation of the minority quota in the EU, meaning a new EU contract. We will have a new EU contract anyway because Macron wants it. He said it in his Sorbonne speech. So this is something which Germany should and could bring into the negotiations. For me, the first test or predictor of what might happen in the future in the EU is already the negotiations with Trump about free trade. Trump says, you have a protectionist system for agricultural products, and either you abolish your trade barriers in agriculture, or I will impose tariffs on German cars, for example. And you can imagine that in the negotiations of the EU with the Americans, there are different views. Germany is very much of afraid of these extra tariffs on car exports to North America, and France is very much afraid of losing its protection against American agricultural imports in the current EU. So the two countries certainly do not have the same preference. Germany says, well, let's follow Trump's wishes and abolish trade barriers in agriculture. It would be a solution without impediments to trade for merchandise, for manufacturing goods. And the French say, no, we can't do that. We better make a trade war with the Americans. So Trump is threatening the EU with high tariffs, and the EU says, oh, we can do the same, and we want to have high tariffs too. But that's the French view, not the German view. And here I think there is a surprising similarity of preferences between these two people whom I depict here, which you would not have thought of before. No? The French are not so much free traders as we would like it to have. And that is the disadvantage of leaving of Brexit for countries like Germany and also for the Nordic countries in the EU. It changes the political equilibrium. And my prediction is, after the Brexit, the EU will become a fortress with trade barriers to the rest of the world. So we will impose tariffs on imports from the rest of the world, and they will do the same, and so we will go into a new period of reduced trade. And this will be disadvantageous for basically everyone, because trade is not a zero-sum game. Everyone benefits from specialization. The Brits have a point. The original criticism I discussed already of the EU, but there is a further aspect. Cameron, when he negotiated with the EU, said, we can't allow migrants from other EU countries to come to our country and be rather quickly integrated in the welfare state, become net recipients of government resources. Switch off the welfare magnet. That's basically what he said. He wanted an extended period, waiting period, before migrants from other EU countries could be integrated in the British welfare system. But the EU said, no, we are not moving. And he came back with empty hands to Britain. And I think that was one of the reasons why then the parliament was so frustrated about this negotiation process. Mrs. Merkel in particular was criticized by Cameron, as far as I know, that she did not move an inch in his direction. She had the refugees in her mind in spring 2016 and wanted a redistribution system and needed the consent of other countries in Europe. She could not take the British issue over and make it hers, unfortunately. We come to a very basic deficiency of the EU when you think about migration. As economists, we know migration is good if it is driven by wage differences, but of course it is not good when it is driven by something else, or also driven by something else, namely the benefits of the welfare state. We have three rivaling, competing goals in Europe. We want to have free migration. We want to have the inclusion principle. Migrants who migrate into a particular state receive all social benefits from that state. That's a holy cow in the EU legal doctrine. And we want to have the welfare state. We don't want to have a night watchman state with lots of inequality. We want to have a state which takes from the rich and gives to the poor in order to reduce the income inequality. These are, I think, common goals of the EU. But the three goals don't go well together. If we let the process move like this, then the better welfare states will come into trouble, because the needy people will move to the welfare states, because in addition to their wage, they get an extra from the welfare state and are certainly for that reason also better off, which puts financial strain on these states. Britain seems to argue we don't want to have free migration. I find this completely wrong as an economist. I think we should keep free migration for many reasons, among them economic reasons. But if we want to preserve free migration and the welfare state, then I think the inclusion principle has to go. This is a goal, but it is a rather weak goal. It is not on the same level as the two others. And therefore, I would suggest to the EU to change its inclusion principle. Tony Blair said something similar. If the EU makes concessions with migration, a second referendum might imply victory for the remainers. And this is, I think, what we could do. An offer that Britain cannot reject would be we change the EU such that welfare benefits in the future will be distinguished as earned benefits and inherited or unearned benefits. Earned benefits are benefits coming from the labor contract, in a sense, which you have in the host country. Unemployment insurance, health insurance, pensions, and so on. No? And then there are other benefits that have nothing to do with the wage contract, with the labor contract. They refer to people who cannot work and are sick and ill and have always been sick. You know, someone has to take care of them. Under the current EU system, they would also be included. According to the 2004 directive on free movement, any EU citizen has the right to move to any other EU country, whether for working purposes or not, and after he has been there for 5 years, he's fully entitled to all social benefits in that country. And that certainly is an incentive to migrate, but why? Why should this be the case? We could also say the home country remains responsible for some of the welfare benefits, namely those which are not related to the labor contract. And then people are fully free to migrate. So country A gives me my benefits, my welfare benefits, and with these benefits I go to Mallorca because the sun is shining and enjoy them there. Why not? Why should Spain pay? Simply because the welfare recipient goes to Spain. But that's the current EU rule. I think we have a deficiency in the EU, and if we remove this deficiency and change the EU and go back to the Brits and say, here, we do not only want you to change and make concessions, we make a concession. We change the EU in a way Cameron wanted it. Wouldn't that be a possibility for you to keep your face and revoke the decision? After all, it's a new basis for your decisions now. And that's what I actually would suggest. So my letter to the Chancellor is, the German Chancellor, you have the power to make the UK reconsider her decision. Please appeal to the UK to revoke the exit and to the other EU countries to make Britain an offer that would facilitate this decision. Will she do it? No, but she should do it. As an economist, I'm willing to distinguish between a forecast and a recommendation. So my recommendations, to sum up, is if the Brexit agreement will not be ratified next week, the EU should make Britain an offer it cannot reject: earned benefits from it will have to come from guest country, host country better, inherited benefits from the home country. In the case of ratification of this agreement, Germany and the new Hanseatic League in the EU should require a new definition of a blocking minority in the Minister Council. Third, despite Brexit, the UK should be allowed to enjoy free trade with the EU even if migration is not allowed. Regrettably, it's not allowed. I'm strictly against this. But given that it is so, we should at least allow free trade for the rest. But this offer I would not make now because it would facilitate Brexit. I would make it, don't tell it someone else, after the Brexit decision has been taken. And of course, no punishment, please. The EU must remain a union in which everyone likes to participate voluntarily. It is not a prison. And after all, the Brits will always stay our neighbors. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this fascinating and balanced presentation. We're a bit over time, but I think it would be a pity to just stop without at least allowing one or two questions. So is there anybody who is dying to ask a question? Yes. If you could state your name
Hello.
And then ask the question.
Hi. Florian Buhr, Chemistry Department. First of all, thank you very much for being here. My question regards your second recommendation for Germany to seek a renegotiation of the blocking minority clause in the Lisbon Treaty. Obviously, this is a very reasonable demand, but how likely do you think the current German administration will seek to implement this? And not only the current administration, also a possible next administration, which is likely to be a black-green coalition, therefore a bit more ideological and maybe a bit less interested even to stand up for German industry. And what might be the consequences of them not seeking to do this? Thank you.
How likely? You know, there are lots of demands by Macron, the French president, on the table. He wants this and he wants that. He wants the common deposit insurance. He wants to have a common unemployment insurance. He wants to have a common EU budget just for the Euro countries. Originally, he wanted to have a common, a separate parliament for the Euro countries and so on. So a long list, like for Christmas, the children have. And Germany has asked for nothing. It's strategically not optimal. There are a couple of points one should also put on the list, and this is one of them. So, and then we will see. Is this a forecast? How clever is the German government? I don't know. If I had something to say, I would certainly put it on the table. There are some others who say that. Some important lawyers in Germany have argued along these lines, so it's not only my thought about this issue. Will it happen? What will happen and what should happen, normative and positive statements are not the same, unfortunately. But this is the problem of an economist throughout his life.
Okay.
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. Could I look at your policy recommendation number 1, as your slide is on show at the moment? Just of orders of magnitude, is this really a big issue? You talked about payments and orders of magnitude. EU claimants are about 2% of total claimants in the UK. We have this view that many migrants are coming in for to claim benefits, or they're coming in for other reasons. Actually, the two reasons that we have people coming into the UK are to work, and they pay taxes. They pay more taxes than UK citizens or UK-born citizens. And they come for education. And those numbers are very, very similar for both education and for work. And that's why I think many people in this university are so concerned about Brexit. So I'm just really, is that really a big issue to focus on the benefits issue?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I see what you say, but the migrants also to Britain are not homogeneous. Well, even if on average it is true that migrants pay even more than the average, as I heard, there are others who don't. And you get a negative selection of migrants through the existence of the welfare state. That's not deniable. Is it a large number already or not? No, probably not. But we're in the beginning of a long phase of free migration in Europe, which will last for decades and centuries, perhaps. And here it will have its implications. Public finance is my subject. Already in the 90s was full of scholarly papers on the magnetism of welfare states. It generates the wrong selection of people and does put the welfare states under pressure, because by definition a welfare state is an institution that takes from the rich and gives to the poor. And therefore, it does have this element of magnetism. Also, Britain might be better off in terms of selecting migrants than other EU countries. The statistics show that Britain and the UK have an above average quality of immigration, and France and Germany have a below average quality of migration. So it is already an issue for some European welfare states to have the mass migration of poor, extremely poor people. And basically, if you are poor, or let's say if you're unskilled and migrate into an economy, you probably earn less than the average. In Germany, we have good statistics for that. So migrants earn way below the average. And since we have a progressive tax system, they pay below average contributions to the state. And below average contributions mean that these contributions are not enough to finance the whole potpourri, the whole spectrum of government services. I'm not only speaking about welfare benefits, I speak about everything. The infrastructure, the legal system, the police, everything costs money. And the average citizen would just, basically by definition, pay enough funds to the state to finance that, and the below average one would be a net recipient. Okay. So I think it is a defect of the EU, this inclusion principle. It can't stay. I can't imagine that it works for the long run. And I remember very well when the directive on free movement was being discussed, which came then in 2004, when politicians said, oh, well, this is not a non-issue, there won't be migration, and, you know, it will not be a migration of any sort in Europe. And there were forecasts of minuscule numbers. The true numbers were much, much bigger. We had experienced a much bigger migration from Poland and other Eastern European countries that was forecast. And that in this very short period of time. What is 15 years in historical perspective? Nothing. I think we have the opportunity, when we talk about Brexit, to heal the EU from this obvious deficiency in its incentive structure. And in addition, we can use it to make Britain an offer. To show Britain that we are serious. We are not only asking Britain to change, but we are changing too. So I am looking for the politician who is courageous enough to stand up and say, here, Britain is so important that I suggest that we change the EU And there could be other topics, actually, where we change the EU in terms of the subsidiarity principle and so on, so that it is more attractive for Britain to stay. And wouldn't that be a better world if the EU became the way you wanted it to be? You know, probably I want that too, and many economists want that too. So we should take the opportunity, if there is a prolongation of this date beyond the 29th of March, to seriously sit together as earnest people to find a new agreement which would please us mutually.
Okay, so now we're out of time. I want to thank you very much for a fascinating and balanced presentation. And I want to invite everybody downstairs for drinks, where you can ask your question. And I want to thank Professor Sinn with a symbolic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Downstairs.